Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Carla DeMarzo-Sanchez. I am a solutions specialist with Moody's Analytics in New York. And today we're going to speak a little bit about commercial real estate research in the US, specifically its geospatial components. And so with me, I have my colleagues Jake and Lindsey, who will be able to talk a little bit more about both the business and commercial side of what we do, and then a little bit about our geospatial products. So first off, we're going to kick it off by talking about Moody's Analytics, who we are, what we do, and some of the main data sets we use. And then second, we're going to talk about commercial location score. So this is the real geospatial product that we've developed to better analyze commercial real estate in the US. So Lindsey, I'll hand it to you for these first few slides.
Thanks, Carla. So I'd like to begin with just a brief overview of Moody's Analytics and the integrated data sets and solutions that we can provide to clients, all with the ultimate goal of assessing risk. You can see the 8 areas of expertise here, but I'd really like to focus on 3 specifically, namely the US commercial real estate and geospatial data that we acquired through Moody's acquisition of Reis, the structured analytics and valuation data, and economic and consumer credit. So as you can see here, Moody's has the current and historical data for structured securities at the loan level, as well as the pool level, to track securities performance and to value securities, as well as the credit and cash flow models to stress portfolios. This data is mapped to the physical real estate asset and geotagged to the parcel level as well. In addition to this, Moody's has economic, consumer credit, and financial data updated daily at global, macro, regional, and industry levels. We also forecast at the global, macro, subnational, and regional levels to stress test consumer credit portfolios, which quantifies the impact of the economic environment on a book.
And this third piece here that we want to talk about is, of course, the commercial real estate data through Reis. So prior to the Moody's acquisition, and for many decades, Reis has been collecting property level data all across the US on core 4 assets, meaning office, multifamily, retail, industrial, but also some of the more kind of niche assets in the United States. So seniors housing, student housing, and the like. We take a lot of pride in getting this data directly from the properties and then rolling it up to the submarket and metro, so that we can see how neighborhoods and markets have trended over several credit cycles. And so this has been a key part of what we do, and really a main reason why Moody's acquired us, to have this really deep, rich data set moving forward. So here, Lindsey and I wanted to talk a little bit about the trends that we see in data strategy. We're both in client-facing roles where we speak a lot with different types of US and international clients about how they want to consume data. And specifically in the US and perhaps in other countries, a real difficulty we've had in the past is with property matching. So different properties across the country and different parcels could have different addresses. And while Reis might have a rent or an occupancy observation on a property at 123 Main Street, another database might have that at a different address, or might, call it something on a side street. And sometimes when we, for data science purposes, want to bring different data sets together, that's very difficult to do, to start with that matching process. So what Reis and Moody's has done is taken the Reis database and started matching it and finished matching it to the CMBS universe of securitized properties. So slowly but surely, what we're able to do is show you not only property observations, but then also the debt on these properties. And more data sets are to come soon, because we have so many different lines of business within Moody's Analytics. We're going to be able to match the Reis database to climate scores. So we have very specific ESG data that we're now going to continue to match. So this is kind of the big trend that we've been seeing, trying to align all these addresses across the US with the most important data that we have under our umbrella.
And to continue on that trend, we've noticed with our clients trying to do something similar to what Moody's is doing internally, which is really doing a deep dive analysis on what data exists in-house, what data assets do you have, how do you normalize and cleanse the data, create a golden copy, map it all to each other, and then finally have the ability to reuse this data to increase your ROI on these massive data expenditures. And it wouldn't be a 2020 presentation without mention of COVID. The global data preparation tools market is anticipated to reach $8.5 billion within the next 5 years. So combining all of these emergent technologies with Moody's financial markets expertise and existing data is really going to result in some powerful tools. One early example of that is COVID Pulse, which Moody's launched back in April of this year and is free to the public to view. It uses machine learning and natural language processing to prioritize real-time news stories that are related to COVID and are based on sentiment. So we take news from 40,000 different sources and intelligently track and prioritize this, which enables users to then efficiently assess risk and identify emerging sector themes. So as Carla mentioned, other examples of this using these data preparation tools are going to include overlaying ESG data pertaining to the climate risk onto existing commercial real estate knowledge as well. So we're looking forward to things to come in that space as well. So I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Jake, who's going to do a bit of a deeper dive into one particular geospatial data set, the commercial location score, and some of its associated use cases.
Thanks, Lindsey. Yeah, as Lindsey said, I'll provide a quick overview of our commercial location score product, which is really born out of several streams of research coming out of our commercial real estate research team, which we were interested in several seemingly interrelated things as it relates to spatial data science and commercial real estate asset valuation. And specifically, our original goal was to see whether or not we could distill down vast amounts of really granular spatial data and information to help drive actionable insights so that CRE market participants could make better, more informed decisions. And when we say market participants, we're really talking about both investors as well as lenders. And a related note, one of the things we were directly interested in was determining whether or not location quality, location attributes actually are meaningful in terms of explaining collateral valuation and income generating performance. And if we go to the next slide, we can say, I guess, somewhat conclusively that we were somewhat successful in doing that. In fact, we produced what is now being sold as commercial location score. And our original tagline for CLS was know the submarket without walking the block. Now, the issue here is that most CRE market participants, when they're doing analysis, they're working with data, probably from REIS, that's been aggregated up to the metro or some other type of market geography. If you're lucky and you're using REIS data, you can also get data at the neighborhood or submarket level. But our goal was to go even more granular than that, to go submarket. And you can't get more granular than the individual property or parcel level. And so that's where CLS comes into play. And it's really kind of the first standardized quantification of location quality for all commercial real estate assets across the US. And with our unified score, users can quickly analyze any and all commercial properties across the US using a consistent nationwide scoring standard, which allows them to objectively compare location quality across a set of comparable properties, a set of comparable market areas across the entire country. Now, we can score each and every parcel in the US, and we've done that, but we've actually built out separate modeling frameworks for each of the market segments that you see here: office, retail, industrial, multifamily, and hotel. And that's just because location matters differentially to these different market segments. For example, industrial properties, it's really important to be close to a highway of some sort. It's much less important to be near an open space or a park of some sort. So to account for those idiosyncratic factors and characteristics within the individual market segments, we constructed specific modeling frameworks. And if we go to the next slide, we can get a little bit more into the technical details. Again, the modeling framework for CLS is probably best described as an ensemble of individual spatial models built atop a mountain of really precise and granular spatial data. The idea was to identify the specific locational characteristics that help make a place, that help us differentiate one place from another in terms of its viability or desirability. What we settled on are a set of 6 key factors, or what we call components, and you see them here. So we have components for spatial demand, economic prosperity, amenities, safety, business vitality, and transportation. Now, each of these components are they themselves comprised of individual subcomponents. For example, transportation, our measure of accessibility of transportation networks is actually comprised of 4 individual submodels, each of which is built off of a gravity type proximity model to measure accessibility to things like highways, subways, airports, as well as seaports. And then we aggregate that up later on. Our economic prosperity score, which is our measure of disaggregated economic activity, or GDP, is actually built using a spatially econometric framework built on top of local economic data such as household incomes, business payrolls, things of that nature. Now, the idea is that once we have all of these components built out and scored out to our liking, we would combine them up, roll them up into one overall singular metric indicating location quality. We would call that our comprehensive or overall commercial location score. And I think we'll see an example of that on the next slide. If we zoom in, we can show an example map. And this is what our users are actually presented with when they log into our interface. We have to show a map. Of course, this is the CARTO conference, and we want to show off some of our hard work. What we're showing here is the spatial distribution of commercial location scores for the office segment in downtown San Francisco. If you're familiar with the San Francisco office market, then this distribution probably meets your prior expectations. We're also highlighting a specific example here, specifically 405 Howard Street, which is where our offices are located. You're being told that indeed that is an office property and that the location score for that specific location is 938. And that's actually really good. As it turns out, the CLS modeling framework scores each and every commercial property in the US on a scale of 400 to 1,000, 1,000 being the best, 400 being, I don't want to say the worst, but maybe not as good. So 405 Howard is up there. And what you can see down below, we also include individual information on how those components score out for that specific location. You see that high 938 is actually being driven in part by business vitality, spatial demand, economic prosperity, much less so on safety, but the other components help outweigh that effect. And so if we move on to the next slide, after showing that great example, we can think about some of the use cases that we think clients might be able to incorporate CLS into their workflows. We start, of course, with the risk modeling side. That's our bread and butter at Moody's. In fact, CLS was built out specifically to be included in our CRE lending risk modeling framework, CMM, or Moody's commercial mortgage metrics. And just to let you in on a little secret, when we include this granular information captured by CLS, we actually improve our accuracy ratio quite a bit. So we are actually better able to explain or predict default behavior when we incorporate such granular information. We can think about portfolio assessment or tracking individual properties over a portfolio over time, provide an early monitoring alert for degrading locational quality of specific assets. And then, of course, we can think of some of the comparative analysis workflows. And we think CLS can be directly applied either in conjunction with or in comparison to the vast amounts of data that are being used in those data-heavy projects, such as appraisals, broker reports, and, of course, augmenting a lot of the data provided by site visits. And so those are some of the client use cases. We can also really quickly talk about some of our data sources. I said that our modeling framework was built on top of a mountain of data. Here are some of our sources. Some are public, some are proprietary. We use a lot of data from the Census Bureau, some of their Tiger Line shape files, as well as their economic surveys, county and zip code business patterns. On the proprietary side, we absolutely relied extensively on REIS data. In fact, our spatial demand component is built exclusively with REIS outputs. We've used their local estimates of vacancy rates, net absorption, as well as local construction activity. We also relied a little bit on data from some of our Moody's Economy.com colleagues. Our economic prosperity score is built on some of the refined economic data provided by them. And so that's our source. That's a set of our sources. If we move on to the next slide, we can show a little bit about our modeling approach. And I would say that our approach is consistent across the components that you see here on the right. Of course, it starts with getting that granular data that's needed to do refined spatial analysis. Once we have that data in hand, we apply the appropriate modeling framework to the right data to make sure that we're driving the correct set of insights. Once we have those individual factors modeled out, we then combine them up into aggregate components, the components, of course, that you see here on the right. And this process is a bit art and science. We need to be aware of the idiosyncrasies and the data, both in terms of the data distribution itself, as well as the spatial distribution, take into account outliers, things of that nature. So we apply some internal transformation, some other functional forms to bring those up, to combine all of that disparate set of information together into overall components. Again, the components that you see here. And then finally, really quickly moving through this, we bring all of this together on the next slide by combining the information contained in those individual components up into our aggregate or comprehensive commercial location score. And we do that in a way that we think represents an optimal weighting scheme. And really what we're doing here is we're trying to let the data speak for itself. Because if in fact these components are actually good at explaining differences in quality of location based on the set of characteristics that we're capturing, then two, they should also be somewhat valuable in explaining local recent market trends in the CRE marketplace. And so to test that hypothesis, we actually run a set of regression tests in which, again, we rely on some data from our Reese colleagues, namely their transaction sales price database. We run a set of calibration regressions in which we include the 6 individual components as potential explanatory variables to explain those market trends. And to the extent that an individual component is more or less meaningful or more or less important at explaining those trends, that goes towards informing what our final set of component weights actually are. And as I said at the top, each property segment, multifamily, office, retail, what have you, responds and reacts to those market conditions differently. And so we've run 5 distinct separate calibration regression exercises, producing a set of 5 distinct weights. And then at the end of the day, all that remains is taking those weights as given. Once we've scored out each and every commercial property in the US across the 6 components, the 6 dimensions that you see here, then arriving at that overall or aggregate commercial location score is as simple as taking a weighted average of those components using the weights as defined by our calibration regressions. And at the end, and the result is, as you see here on the right side of this slide, it is a final objective direct measurement of location quality respective of a specific property segment, in this case multifamily, that can then be used to compare to any and other properties within the same market segment anywhere in the country. And we'll wrap up by going to the final slide, which again shows the map interface. And I just want to highlight the address search bar at the top. As Carla was mentioning just a few moments ago, Reese has done a tremendous amount of work with property matching, address location functionality, and all of the hard work that they've done is actually built into our interface so that users can directly apply, enter in any location of choice across their portfolio, and our system will automatically match that and bring them to the place on the map where that asset happens to reside, and then you can get all of the associated information that you see here. And again, hats off to our development team for putting all of this massive amount of information into one simple to use interface. And I think with that, we open up for questions.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Jake, Carla, and Lindsey. We have a lot of questions, actually, and we only have 4 minutes. So let's hop to those questions now. So there was one question, somebody from the UK audience asking if the CLS dataset is available for the UK market.
Not yet. That is something that we would absolutely love to do. It's going to be a bit of a tremendous undertaking. So I would say put that on the roadmap. But unfortunately, we're only available as of right now in the US.
Okay, well, that's good. So in terms of the nationwide data set for the US, Dean Gordon has asked the question, there must be some massive anomalies with a nationwide scoring system. Could we hear some examples even from early iterations?
Yeah, so really quickly, one example was that we were getting some odd behavior near I would say unsavory properties, namely waste treatment sites, dumps, things of that nature. And in some iterations, we were actually getting really, really high scores near those. So we had to take some additional care to make sure that properties located across from a chemical plant weren't actually scoring in the 1,000 range or the high 900s. And so, yeah, when you're dealing with a lot of data like this, doing that validation part is a tremendous challenge, and we actually have a small team of folks that are focused solely on that.
Right, and they're all based in the US as well.
The Western Hemisphere. Yeah, so we have some team members that work down in South America.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
And then Anthony Huang has asked the question about the property matching problem. Would you be able to elaborate about the techniques Moody's uses to reduce the number of false positives on the address matching, as I'm sure that's a tough problem?
It is, Carl. I don't know if you have an answer for that. It's a challenge.
Yeah, Moody, Reese specifically has been collecting property data for so many years that, we put a unique identifier on our individual properties many, many years back. And as we get different data sets in to better clean that data, and even as properties trade and we can kind of verify the exact address or how it should be listed, that helps us do a second check each time. So I think it's a function of the unique ID and then just constantly checking the data as we continue to match, what is the best address that we should put in for each property? What is kind of the most proper address?
Okay, this is a classic nitty-gritty spatial challenge here. I'm sure we'll speak about lots of them throughout the conference. I think we have probably time for one more question. So Attila Pessoa has asked the question, how do you consider characteristics related to brown fields and contaminated areas during the geospatial analysis to real estate research?
Yeah. Well, the first part of that question is to identify where those are, and getting and acquiring that level of detail in terms of the data was the first step. And then we do kind of not to give away the secret recipe, but we do some calibration to make sure that what we're putting out there in the marketplace is taking into account where those locations are. And again, not giving away the secret sauce, but we've done quite a bit of work to ensure that our output are consistent with expectations relative to those, as I call the unsavory properties.
Okay, cool. Well, Jake, Carla, Lindsey, there are a ton more questions. I think you guys win the prize for the most questions of the talk today. So well done there. I think there's a few more to follow up on, so I'll leave that to you guys on the chat. But now we are going to move and switch gears away from real estate. Thanks for joining us from across the pond. We're now.